There's probably a two-part presentation. I thought in the first instance to, maybe for our overseas guests, give you a quick snapshot of my business. We're a mechanical contractor. We've got operations in 3 states nationally. Where the delivery model is a little bit different to the US, so it's amazing when we talk about terminologies, sometimes where it sort of slips, and the hydraulic plumbing analogies was a good one. We're engineers, we're project managers, supervisors, programmers, we administer the works, we contract the works out, but predominantly the actual work on site is carried out by subcontractors. We do carry a small crew of installers, but ultimately we'll subcontract the duct installation, we'll subcontract the supply of that ductwork, we'll subcontract the mechanical plumbing, the building management systems, the mechanical electrical works, the insulation. So there's just a difference in the model. Having said that, in Victoria, they self-perform. So here in Melbourne, you'll probably find that the major mechanical contractors carry their own labour for the plumbing installation, the duct installation. So there's some subtle differences in how we deliver projects. I want to preface what I'm saying ultimately by I'm the biggest advocate of BIM. Our company's been involved with it for the last 10 years. So 2007 was probably the first building that I was involved with at 100 Pacific Highway in North Sydney. It was about 25 stories. We're involved with a 100,000 square metre hospital currently under commissioning, which I guess in for the US compatriots is about 1 million square metres, 18 operating theatres. We're involved with data centres. We're doing multi-storey office blocks. We just finished a major central plant with about 18 megawatts of cooling, which I think is about 3 to 1 from memory of BTUs, so it's up and around the 60,000. But ultimately, we're generally at the forefront. Off-site fabrication, integration, Revit, BIM, all the vernacular, that's where our business is. So I wanted to preface that because it's about how do we improve BIM. That's what we're looking at. What are we seeing at the coalface? What are we seeing in the industry beyond the software? So if I grab my clicker, which is here. So ultimately, I think as a product, it just presents absolutely exciting opportunities, and I think ultimately one day we'll see it achieve its full potential. You know, the seamless model that goes straight into design, into construction, where it gets built and it gets commissioned, the building gets demolished, refurbished, cradle to grave stuff, and really that's where we'll inevitably get. But the industry on that journey, if you like, has changed and developed in different guises. It's still not quite as seamless as it could be. Not all companies have the same proficiencies. Not all trades have adapted as quickly. We're experiencing delays on site. There's no doubt there are delays on site because of it. We're not seeing the full benefits of BIM on site currently. We're seeing an increased element of disputes on projects. Who takes responsibility for the model? Are the risks actually shared fairly? So, and there's still this lack of understanding, and it's more at the coalface. It's the site manager, it's the supervisor, but it's also the client through construction who generates a change order or variation and expects the model to be updated overnight, expects ductwork on site the next day, everything to be completed within days. And there's an education process, I think, all the way down the line, from clients all the way down, that to really give BIM an opportunity, we need to give it time often. So, and it's as much about new technology and the incompatibility sometimes with traditional delivery models. BIM, new age approach, everything we want. Technology, promise of improvements, and the second is the traditional construction model that we have out on site. And the two don't progress at the same rate. Technology changes so much faster than habits, human nature. So we're seeing on the site, if you like, so much of this element where the technology's moved and the training, the cultural changes necessary to make the most of that technology is developing. It's still a few years behind in some instances. So the intent of today's presentation is to maybe look at ourselves, critique ourselves, understand what the deficiencies are, debate it, and maybe challenge the status quo. I think this is a good analogy. I think we want BIM success. We want to take it to its ultimate capability, but there's really a whole set of curves on the way before we get there. So what were the issues? And I think that was when I started looking at it, and I'll take my Fredon Air hat away and decide to sit as the New South Wales president of the AMCA. What are the issues? Where are we as an industry? What are we proficient at? What aren't we? So I thought I'd conduct a survey in the industry. And we'll talk through some of those findings. I sent the survey out to mechanical, electrical, fire, hydraulic contractors, duct suppliers, pipework suppliers, 15 companies in all. The survey had 28 questions. I won't bore you with all 28. If people want to see the full survey, I'm happy to send that out. Predominantly first-tier contractors or contractors that have been involved with first-tier projects. The Sydney metropolitan area, more for convenience and the fact that it was easier to get around to everybody and talk to everybody. And all of them with over 5 years BIM experience. So we're representative, if you like, of the top end of the market, even though you'd say, well, look, 15 companies, really is that representative of the industry? The reality is those 15 companies probably carry out over $1 billion a year of work, and they do represent the major buildings that are going on within Sydney at the moment. So the positives, the things that we're seeing that we all know in this room, and that's why we've all spent time, effort, money, investment in BIM. 70% of the respondents stated that there's significant reductions of clashes with the building structure or other services. 60%, 56%, if you like, stated that they can see an increase in offsite fabrication occurring, which again boils down to the accuracy of the documentation. And we had positive results in relation to reductions of as-built drawings, as well as waste. So resounding. But there are issues on site. We know, for example, that workshop drawings aren't being produced on time as quickly as we'd like them to see. We know that the coordination processes generally aren't as seamless. And if I can just, again, for our overseas visitors, where, in fact, I'm not quite sure, but Fredon have an electrical, mechanical in-house capability. You might have other mechanical companies that have a hydraulic, but very few have all services in-house. So when we start talking about coordination, we're talking about bringing different parties from different companies in one room, which I think ultimately would make it a bit more difficult to coordinate than if you had everything in-house. We know the drawings aren't produced on time, and we know that LOD deliverables, so the BIM objectives, are often compromised. So we asked some questions of our members. Mismatches. We tender, we receive 2D PDF drawings, sometimes sections, sometimes PDF drawings of the model, if you like, 3D dimensions. But ultimately, we asked, when you've won the job and you've secured the job, are there mismatches between the PDFs that you receive at tender time and the model that you subsequently receive? And as you can see there, it was fairly unanimous. No one said that there was never any mismatches, and the regular, always component. The fact is that when we're tendering projects, what we're tendering isn't quite what the model is, whether one is outdated or the other one isn't, whatever it might be. So I'm starting to, what I want to do is through these questions, piece together perhaps some of the issues that may be contributing to the problems that some of the projects are suffering from. As I asked over the duration of the projects, how long does BIM take to draw? And the reason I asked that was because we've always had mismatches at tender time. When it was 2D and when it was 3D AutoCAD, there was always a component where, yeah, the tender wasn't quite right. There was documentation wasn't quite right, but we overcome it. It was just part of the process. It was just part of what we did. But could it be more problematic if it takes us longer to draw? Ultimately, pie chart, and I'll go through, I've got a summary if you like, but I'll show you next, but 3 times as long. A third of the industry is saying at the moment it's taking 3 times too long. Now, we'll talk about where companies are on that technology scale, There'll be some companies that have been involved we've been for 8 to 10 years, which would say over here it takes as much time as normal. They're at that point. But certainly right now, the industry, effectively 64% of respondents say it takes twice as long to draw. So we've now got a situation where at tender time, series of PDFs, a model mismatch, construction commences, and it's taking us longer to draw. So I thought, let's look at the programming. Is there sufficient time in the program to give us an opportunity to, if you like, overcome those deficiencies? Pie chart represents it again. Less than 10%, this is the case on less than 10% of projects over here. Over there. And I'll flick over to the summary of what that means. Basically, 2/3 of the companies that participated in the survey said that they didn't have enough time to draw on 75% of their projects. So 3/4 of their projects aren't given enough time to draw. So now we start piecing it together. We tender, we've got a mismatch of documentation, we know it's taking us longer because a lot of these companies are developing their in-house technology, and we don't have enough time to draw on projects. In trying to paint the picture, I moved on to perhaps the software itself. We've got the architectural fraternity, we've got the consultancy fraternity, we've got mechanical contractors, electrical, hydraulic, you bring them together, major projects, models that are hundreds of megabytes in size. Do you experience problems with different BIM software platforms is a question we asked our members. 75% of projects has problems. In fact, I'll summarise it on there. 75% of all projects have interoperability issues. Now, they're saying that not all the respondents saying they're compelling issues that are going to delay our projects for delivery, but what they're saying is that it's a cause of frustration, it's a cause of delays at the start of the project. So it's something that needs to be looked at or at least addressed. This was, I guess I'll go back. I've been in the industry 25, 30 years. I saw the drawing board guys come off that, go to 2D drawings. I saw the 2D go to 3D, and saw the 3D go to Revit and BIM. I would suggest that the time it took for the guys to come off the drawing board to 2D was as far changing as 3D to BIM is in Revit. And the time it takes in years of training and getting the expertise up would be similar. So we're now 10 years into, the industry in general would be 10 years into the process. You know, all our draftsmen currently don't, I think one guy knows that he uses 2D, they all use Revit and BIM. But the reality is we still don't have enough trained guys out there doing drawings for us. And I'm not talking about guys that can produce software, that can run the software. I'm not talking about the guys that, the modelers. I'm talking about detailed guys that can produce a set of drawings that we can go to site and actually build from. And they're the guys that are in their 40s and 50s that have been asked to change the way that they operate. And secondly, also asked to train the young guys coming through, the graduates that are coming through. There's a curve there that needs, there's a time frame there that needs to be addressed. So 80%, you can't get much more resounding than that. I think this is a really, and look, this slide here, it's an extension of what we said. You know, ultimately, drawings are produced in a timely fashion for you to be able to procure your works, administer it, etc. And of course, a flow on from what the survey was giving us was this. It's just a natural flow on. But I thought the next slide is probably the one that you know, we probably need to work on and focus on and discuss in a little bit more detail, and that's the sharing of the responsibility for the model. And we asked our members and said to them, okay, well, do you think everyone in that supply chain, from concepts right through to construction and commissioning, is held accountable? All the percentages may be a bit confusing, but you know, ultimately, what they're saying is that 50% of the respondents say that they think that there's shared accountability on only about a quarter of their projects. So 75% of projects is disjointed. People aren't taking responsibility for the model, the disclaimers, certainly something we'll talk towards the end of the slide about, but I think some compelling feedback there. This was, and again, different companies, different projects. At the first tier level on major construction sites, everyone is familiar with BIM. Take it to the coalface, the site manager, the foreman on site, the supervisor on site. Still entrenched thinking, still not a complete understanding. And back to the client, who expects changes generated overnight into the model, into the build, into the construction without delays on site. So the understanding of what BIM, if you like, the timeframes that BIM takes is a compelling thing. So, a bit of context to it. Again, the whole point of this exercise is to look at ourselves, critique ourselves, and how can we improve it? What can we do maybe as an industry to get the best out of BIM possible? I think, yeah, look, huge potential, absolute. We still haven't finally cracked it, but we need to address, I think, some of these things. And each of them can be done. I'm not saying at all, let's stop doing what we're doing, but we need to maybe contextualize a lot of this stuff in some of the projects that we're doing. At this point, I'd like to introduce a guest speaker because I wanted to sort of make sure that it wasn't skewed too much from a contractor's perspective. I wanted to make sure that we got a balanced view, if you like, on the presentation. And Ranald McGregor's going to be coming up. He's done a master's in BIM and integrated design. He's been in the construction industry for a long time. He's had a broad career with Multiplex in Europe, in Abu Dhabi. He's been a construction director at Global Switch, and currently he's a director of Brompton, and they provide building information modelling, project management services, as well as construction. But importantly, Rand has researched much of what I've been discussing here and what we've found. And I think he'll give us a perspective on how BIM's developed in the Middle East in particular, and what he found there. So if you could just put your hands together for Ran, and I'll bring him up.
Thank you, Richard.
Just flick it over a couple times.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges, a bit more about the challenges facing BIM, and possibly put some thoughts on the way forward. In 2008, I moved to Abu Dhabi to head the construction team on a project called Masdar City. It was an incredibly ambitious project, $22 billion US, and it aimed to create the most sustainable community ever built, the city of the future. Its goals were to be zero carbon, zero waste, and fully powered by renewable energy. They brought in some of the best consultants from around the world, and it was decided that the whole project would be built using BIM. A team of experts were brought in to write the BIM guidelines, and they spent about 5 months producing a document which went into great detail about how every single element was to be modelled, and then how that information was to be utilised through the life cycle of the project. It was a massive document, 286 pages long, a masterpiece. There was only one problem: nobody ever read it. And more importantly, no building built within Masdar City to date has come close to achieving that document. In parallel, Masdar itself was starting to experience a lot of challenges, and it became clear that building a green city in the desert, where in one of the harshest climates on Earth, where nobody had ever built a green building, and where none of the materials specified were available locally, was going to be extremely difficult. The first of the building's programs blew out, costs blew out, and the leadership became frustrated. And then in 2010, there was a change of tact, and the Masdar City goals were amended. It would no longer be a zero waste city, it would be a low waste city. No longer zero carbon, low carbon, and no longer fully powered on renewable energy, but partially powered on renewable energy. And perhaps, I think it rings true that with the old SMART principles, that for goals to be achieved and for BIM goals to be achieved, they have to be realistic, measurable, and achievable with the resources we have available. And when we look at some of the information that Richard has put forward in his survey, it shows that we're also going through a lot of challenges in Australia right now. And somewhat controversially, you know, the survey shows that unlike what we're being sold, in the short term, a lot of users are finding that there is a significant loss in productivity, an increase in time, and an increase in cost. And this comes as a bit of a surprise and a bit of a disappointment to a lot of us because we have very high expectations about the efficiencies that BIM will bring us. There's an enormous amount of data available about BIM in books, journals, articles around the world. And what's surprising is the vast majority of that information focuses on the advantages and the benefits. And there's surprisingly little about the challenges that we are facing. But there are a few authors that have spoken about it, and I'll sort of focus on some of the thoughts of those authors. So this curve here, the J curve of BIM adoption. On the left-hand side, we have the capability. The bottom axis, we have time. And we don't know how to work the buzzer. Anyway, we start over here on the current situation, and we all want to get up to the desired effect. And we believe, or our expected curve is the top line there. So we believe that we implement BIM and straight away we start experiencing the efficiencies. But what actually happens to a lot of organisations is that we actually drop our efficiencies and we end up in the J curve. And it takes quite a long time before we get back to our previous levels of efficiency, and even longer before we get up to our desired. And according to the author, the optimal curve is the yellow one in the middle, which can only be achieved with significant change management strategies across an organisation and not just an investment in technology. Randy Deutsch is a guy who's written a couple of interesting books, and he points out that too often BIM's benefits are presented as a seemingly unending list, and that there is a lot of hype and a lot of myth about BIM, and the reality is somewhere in the middle. Eastman points out that our vision of BIM far exceeds our ability to actually implement it. So the law of disruption, you know, it sort of hits on what Richard was talking about previously, how the technology change is the top curve, expanding exponential rates. But the businesses are down here, and the businesses are struggling to stay abreast as the technology changes. And we could consider this as the BIM gap, the gap between what is possible and what we are achieving. There are a number of hurdles that we need to overcome in order to bridge this gap. First is skill shortage. We have a very significant skill shortage in Australia right now, and not just in BIM modelers, but across the wider industry. And if we really want to see the full potentials of BIM, as we've just seen what's possible in America, we really need to upskill all of our people, not just hire a few BIM modelers. Resistance to change, very significant issue in Australia. We have, we work in an old school industry, and there are a lot of skeptics, a lot of people who don't believe in BIM. I was speaking to a structural engineer the other day, and we were trying to solve a particular problem that we're having on a project, and I suggested that he should use the BIM model to help overcome it. And he looked at me and he said, "Mate, we've been designing for 1,000 years in 2D. Why do we need BIM?" And I think that there are a lot of people out there who are sceptical about BIM, and it'll take a long time to overcome those skeptics. Thirdly, there's no clear roadmap to implementation. Every organisation who enters the BIM journey, it's somewhat of a bespoke journey because we're all different. We want different things out of it, and there's no real clear roadmap of how we do it. A lot of us head along that path using common sense as a guide. And fourthly, cost. It costs a lot of money to make this change, not just in investment in software and hardware, but more importantly in the business processes which are needed in order to jump this gap. So these charts, the left-hand chart points out the perception at the moment that BIM is all about technology and only a little bit about sociology or business change. And the reality is that, according to Deutsch, that BIM is actually only 10% technology and 90% sociology or business change. The inconvenient truth about BIM, according to Oki, who's written in a couple of interesting articles, is that to achieve BIM's many benefits, an organisation has to first pass through a wilderness of adoption, which always seems to hinge on organisational change, not just technology. So just in summary and looking at the way forward, so perhaps it is worth us understanding and acknowledging that BIM adoption will be slow and will be painful. And if we entered our journey understanding that, perhaps we wouldn't be so disappointed along the way when we realise that pain in reality. We need to set realistic and achievable goals, knowing the skills that we have available within our organisation. And most importantly, BIM requires significant organisational change, not just technology change. It's mastering the process, not the technology, that leads to exceptional results. And just before I hand back to Richard, Sydney Harris said it well. Our dilemma is that we hate change and we love it at the same time. What we really want is for things to remain the same but just get better. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Ren. So I guess we're rolling now into that phase where we sort of start contemplating what maybe can be done, what changes can be done to improve the process. I guess the first one is we've pretty much got to be honest with ourselves. I mean, I've got wonderful operators in the business that know how to use the software, the program, can produce wonderful drawings, detailed drawings to build from, but often it gets lost somewhere between the office, the engineering department, and on site. And it's about training up and upskilling some of the older heads, if you like, in the business that have been used to doing things the traditional way. So certainly it's accepting that we need to adapt to a new technology and appreciate that we're still learning. And BIM MEPOS, I'd hate to think where a lot of us would be without some of the initiatives that have come through there. And that's what we need. We need more industry training. We need to accelerate learning. And obviously we know that without the knowledge, the process unravels quickly. And we need to understand and appreciate what it takes. And I'll just go back to what Rand's slide sort of speaks about the business change, about where businesses start with BIM. And where are our companies respectively? Are we at that point? There's guys that are now today, I'm sure, tendering work today, telling people that they can do BIM Revit projects, but they've just bought the software. They've just bought the hardware. You've got companies that have been there, they've now got the social change. The operational changes are coming into the business. It's adapting now to the new technology. It's on the way. It might be 2 or 3 years since it built the software. And then, of course, you've got the people that are abreast of technology now, that have spent the 10 years learning, that have spent the 10 years in adapting their business model and the way that they deliver business to suit technology. And I'd go in on a limb and I'd suggest there's probably nationally 3 mechanical contractors, maybe 4, that would be up there. And I think there'd be a whole myriad that are in that area here, still developing. So all that means is that it's not seamless. It means that the next project that gets awarded, it may not be a Fredon project or a project from another company. The fact is they're going to suffer a similar developing pain, if you like. As an industry, I guess we've got to ask ourselves as well, where are we? I mean, certainly technology's moved. And I'll tell you now, look, there's no doubt the consultancy fraternity, they keep abreast of technology far faster than anybody else in the industry. Architects, they're there. Great adapters, great adopters, quick, and they'll move with technology. The construction industry, I'd say tier ones are probably at that area there. They still haven't got it totally seamless, but that business change model, that operational change is all in that area. There are definitely builders that are still down here. There's still 2D, 3D, CAD duct. So not every project is going to have a great BIM deliverable in the context of that. Not every builder, not every developer, not every subcontractor is going to be able to achieve the optimum. So if we talk about maybe setting, and Rand spoke about setting attainable goals, learn from past projects, absolute. Collaborate. The discussions with our guests from overseas are fantastic. It really gives us an insight in what the possibilities are. Consider adjusting the bar. And what I mean by that is not every project needs LOD 500. Not every client needs LOD 500. Yet we're seeing more and more projects being asked to deliver LOD 500. Now, the reality is, metaphorically, I'd hate to think how many models are sitting on shelves where the client is going through churn, fit-out changes, building adjustments, etc., and that model is not being upgraded. And I'll tell you what's happening now, because we handed over a large hospital 3 years ago, $60 million contract, operating theatres, you name it, BIM, Revit. It went to the FM hands. They then went out to tender for service and maintenance and fit-out type works. We weren't able to secure it. They've handed it over to smaller companies that would not know what BIM and Revit look like. So we've got models that are being developed currently, money that's being spent in attaining these deliverables that really is a waste. So, what adds real value? What's the client really looking for? Do they really need LOD 500? And if I said to a client, I kid you not, I'd imagine right now that if somebody said to me, LOD to 400, LOD to 500, what's the cost for the job? I'd say it's 1%. So if it's $1 million, if it's a $100 million project, it's $1 million. When you translate that jump from LOD 400 to 500 across all trades, it's a sizable amount of money. So I think we need to sort of really do what adds value. And also look at being realistic. What's achievable given that BIM gap in relation to skills and resources that are available? I think resistance to change, and it's not psychological, mental, if you like, it's just habits. It's changing habits more so than resistance to change. I mean, openness with BIM, and we spoke about it, and I'm glad it was brought up earlier on. BIM models should be provided at tender time. We should have more than PDFs. I mean, the construction fraternity should be able to look at that model during tender. We've only generally got 3 or 4 weeks to put the tender together. We should be able to have a look at it, interrogate it. We should be able to understand how complete it is, how incomplete it is. So it enables us to resource the project, enables us to plan, if I can say to my engineering manager, well, look, you're going to need 4 draftsmen or 5 draftsmen for the next 3 months instead of 2. It's all about planning, it's all about delivering and improving delivery. And likewise, the consultancy fraternity and the clients should be able to release that model without fear of reprisals. Now, and I'd really like to put it out there, what is stopping the models being given to us? We're all signing up to disclaimers. I'm giving you the model, you can read it, it's a fantastic thing, but I don't take responsibility for it. And that's fine, that's all, and I'm happy to sign that any day of the year, as long as I can get it and understand it when I'm tendering. And the delivery process, I think, if we want true collaboration, everybody has to be accountable. and everybody's got to be responsible. And there's no doubt that the old traditional construction processes contradicts that aspirational, if you like, process. Collaboration means everybody, and it should mean that the input that they are putting into that model is basically their thumbprint. And that's all it is. That's all we're asking. Unfortunately, contracts are written with a stick-in-the-hand approach, which by nature makes projects adversarial so many times, and it's all about shifting the risk from that company to that company. If I can get rid of my risk, I can manage my company. And the best processes, the best delivery that we've seen with BIM and Revit, and I've been involved with 3 PPPs over the last 10 years, private-public partnerships or boot schemes if you want. They were the best collaborative models, if you like, because everybody was there at the start. Consultants, contractors, it was butter paper, sketch stuff before it went into the model. And certainly, you know, we're talking about major projects, office blocks, public hospitals and that type of thing. So these aren't small projects, these aren't easy projects by any stretch, but it brought everybody in together. So I'd love to have a conversation about that. I'd love to hear your views about releasing the model. I think they're really easy steps that the industry can take. You know, and certainly they're easy steps that shouldn't expose anybody unduly to commercial issues. Because I think ultimately, to get us where we've got to get get the best outcomes across the board, we've got to collaborate. And that's only ever going to happen if we share risks. Okay. Thank you. Come on, other contractors. Yes, sir.
Hi, sorry, it's me again.
Yeah.
Just in regard to the issues you brought up with the survey that you had there and all the different stats and all the different problems that we have as an industry moving forward. If we were to look at the UK approach of a government-driven planned out mandate which the framework is put in place, and it's about education and it's about the legal side of it and about general framework, how much of all of those issues that we have up there might be ticked off, or at least, you know, the majority of that aspect ticked off, if we had that approach and we decided that as an industry and as a government, we were going to take a 5-year plan to roll out a particular approach?
Look, mandates are, you know, on the surface are always great things, and I'd love to know, and I don't know how successful the experience has been in the UK and whether, you know, so I'd probably need to understand more of that before I gave you a truthful answer. Mandates are great, regulations are great to drive change, and government often do that. So I certainly wouldn't be anti it. On the other side, I think if any projects at the moment over $50 million in construction, so it's total construction build, are BIM projects now. So the mandate's there, it's through client demands, through the industry changing. But yeah, look, I think government mandates are a good thing. I think ultimately often they drive change. And in fact, if I look at the projects that we've done and the bulk of our work over the last little while has been university work, government, universities, they change. They make the changes. They've got the ability to drive often, you know, energy, Green Star, neighbours, all those things that really come through from those organisations more so than the private sector.
Just to comment on that, because to me the big thing is about the framework, because we can have owners say we want this or we want that, but unless we actually have a structured framework and data schemes and legal aspects around it, we can't exchange that at all. I mean, we have these fantastic companies doing these amazing things, but unless we can actually say, okay, this data we have, I can give it to you, and you can understand that, and a duct is a duct, or whatever it is, we all understand the same common language. We're kind of...
it's just a shame. We just don't, we're such a mistrust. The industry's developed like that over years, and the reality, we're big boys. We're at the top end of town. We know what's required. We're not going to chase you because there's a duct missing, or if we understand the contractual terms, we've got to break down those barriers. I think if BIM is truly going to achieve what it needs to achieve.
Good to see you out there, Richard.
Thank you.
Russell Telford from Coombs.
Russell?
Look, really interesting, I suppose, and appreciate the survey and really good feedback and the articulation being for the innovation curve. I guess that's what we're talking about. And I suppose the contrast that's Dave with a very self-delivered model out of the US in terms of Dave Pikey's presentation. And you talked a little bit about the fragmentation or different ways the industry delivers in the Federation of State model of Australia. So just the experience of maybe getting the benefit downstream, so whether that is in the delivery of the self-performing style of work that are getting the efficiencies out of BIM, or as you described, the transition of a build product into a maintenance product where someone actually has the smarts to pick that up. How important do you think the structure of the industry will be in terms of that passing through that efficiency in the delivery chain and the challenges of some states around that very fragmented subcontractor model?
Yeah, my view is, and when I entered the industry back in the early 90s, it was Matthew Hall, it was a lot of companies, UK-based companies that had multi-services for integration in-house. Wonderful business model when things are going well and the economy can carry that. Really tough when the economy starts slowing down to carry those type of things. And to answer your question a little bit further, if you like, to put some backdrop, we've off-site fabrications have been a big event. I mean, we just did 1.5 kilometres of multi-services in our factory, sprinklers, hydraulic, and 5-metre modules. You throw up 70 metres a day with 4 men, totally done off-site. Did we see the value of that? No, because our subcontractors wouldn't provide the efficiencies back. So the steelwork, the engineering, the design that went behind it. So like BIM and like everything, I think it will change. And I think maybe a state-based, it'll change not based on states. I think Victoria's probably will change faster because they're already self-performing. I think in New South Wales and those other states where it's a subcontractor model, it'll progress much slower. But I think ultimately it may well change to the point where, yeah, there is multi-service businesses out there that are providing the full, that are going to follow the US model. The other issue behind it all, of course, is just the magnitude of the size of the market. I love hearing what the US company is doing. You know, I mean, we'll turn over about 150 mechanically across 3 states. I mean, they double that in a 20-kilometre radius in Chicago. I mean, it's just a different world. But ultimately, I think they will definitely make change. Does that sort of cover the answer or the question?
Fine, mate. Was it right or wrong? I was expecting. I think it's important in what you're really reinforcing the BIM MEPOS initiative. And we talk about mandates and things, but really the heart of a lot of that's development of standards. So the support of the initiative in terms of standards, and the other really strong point out of the initiative is training and upskilling.
Yeah.
So if you look at, and I think the more and more we've looked around the world, probably the more and more we should realise what a lucky place we are in terms of the collaboration going on around BIM MEPOS and the development of standards. And there's no reason why a lot of those standards wouldn't be BIM MEP global if you think about it in terms of the parameters convention, naming conventions, all those sort of things. So stepping the energy and horsepower to maybe help a lot of those companies that are trying to get on that innovation curve, at least they're not having to go through some of the pain of being that bleeding edge type development, and really important in seeing the advanced training coming through to the workforce. So I think you articulated the issues, mate, and got to get the roadmap going forward.
Absolutely. And I must admit, it's like everything, innovators are always the ones that have suffered the pain in front. So companies like yours, like, you know, my company, is any of the companies that have been involved at that bigger end of town have suffered the pains, if you like, of development, and come out the other end. And I think the industry and the AIMSAT, through the AIMSAT Association, I think we should have an easier transition for those companies that are emerging, if you like, and will emerge over the next few years.
From the University of Canberra. Nice segue into my question. I wondered if you could unpick again for us a little bit more the skills shortage and how you see the university and the training sector, or the education sector, assisting you in your skills shortage. What does the education training best thing look from your point of view in terms of your trades, your new graduates and your current professionals?
Yeah. Look, our graduates generally have a mechanical engineering background, and if you like, the preparedness once they come out of university, for me, it's really a point of saying, okay, well now we enter them into our graduate program, so we've got a series, a 6-month, if you like, stint through the division of business, and they come out the other end and ultimately decide what they want to be. Do they want to be an engineer, a project manager, etc. A lot of the degrees at the moment aren't, if you like, fine-tuned towards building services and mechanical services. The UK has a great degree program for building services, and we don't. But that's okay, we can live with that, because I think industry training, training of our graduates is just part of what we do. But I think BIM's a bit different. I think BIM is building information modelling. So the graduates that come out with that, the degree that sits behind that, should be very conversant with building models, understanding, because it's really a finite, if you like, box that they work in. So what I'd like to see in relation to a BIM type degree is to have a practical, a 6-month, to have a sandwich type, the old sandwich courses, 6 months working for a company, 6 months back at uni, so that they come out of the 4 or 5 years and they've actually got BIM detailed training. Because it's not a broad degree, it's focused on building.
So just to be clear on that, you mean that they're sort of more on the technology side, or do they understand building in your area?
Sorry.
Yeah, are they IT people or are they mechanical engineers?
So they're generally IT people that we're training. So traditional BIM detailed draftsmen came out of the trades. Some have got degrees, some have got diplomas, and they go through a training at work. So ultimately, they are. In fact, now with Revit at the moment, what we're seeing is software operators. We're seeing people that can operate software. They'll do a nice model, and as some of the older heads in the business say, they look great. They're coloured and the cartoons, so we've got to take that and we've got to move them into the details, if you like, and ensuring they can produce detailed models.